I received a pornographic video. Do you like this? The man speaking in the video is my husband, Mark, whom I haven't seen for several months. He is naked, his shirt and pants scattered on the ground, thrusting forcefully on a woman whose face I can't see, her plump and round breasts bouncing vigorously. I can clearly hear the slapping sounds in the video, mixed with lustful moans and grunts. Yes, F***CK me hard, baby. The woman screams ecstatically in response. You naughty girl. Mark stands up and flips her over, slapping her buttocks as he speaks. Stick your *SS up. The woman giggles, turns around, sways her buttocks and kneels on the bed. I feel like someone has poured a bucket of ice water on my head. It's bad enough that my husband is having an affair, but what's worse is that the other woman is my own sister, Bella. I let the video play, watching and listening to the two of them having *X, my disgust being provoked time and time again. Every time I hear their moans, my heart feels like it's being stabbed. The cheating continues. After a few more slaps, he grabs her buttocks, thrusts his P** and *S deep into her vagina, and starts pounding vigorously. After a few more thrusts, Mark and Bella moan together as they climax. They collapse on the bed, kissing and caressing each other's faces. Do you treat my sister like this in bed too? Bella's coquettish voice rings out. Don't mention her. Mark's ruthless voice echoes. I haven't even kissed her. She can't compare to you at all. I knew you only loved me. Bella smiles satisfied, hooking Mark's neck, leans in to kiss him, and says, I want to do it again. Seeing them rolling together again, I feel a wave of nausea and can't watch anymore. I angrily press the pause button, swallowing hard. I am very clear. This video must have been sent by Bella. She wants to tell me that she still holds Mark in her grip, and I am powerless against it. Apart from a certificate and title, Mark and I don't resemble a married couple at all. Bella indeed knows how to twist the knife further. 3 years ago, on that fateful day, I never imagined was going to begin the worst turning point of my life. All was made ready to celebrate the union of Bella and Mark. It was only mere minutes to the wedding when Bella disappeared, or at least found out she was gone. Bella was nowhere to be found. My parents, who were desperate to salvage the embarrassment and save face in front of the guests, or whatever it was they were trying to protect that day, turned to me. They told me to put on my sister's wedding dress, to take Bella's place at the altar. There was no room for argument, neither was I given the choice to say no. I was to be the figurehead, the stand-in bride who'd fulfill the ceremony in Bella's absence. There were no words of blessing and no well wishes for a happy future. Instead, all I received were instructions to be a good wife. This was how it all started. I was left numb, standing there in the borrowed wedding dress to exchange vows with a man I barely knew. It felt as though my dreams and aspirations were suddenly overshadowed by the harsh reality of my circumstances. Like my life had been snatched away from me in an instant, and I barely recalled what happiness felt like after that day. I was constrained in every sense of the word. Did I say this was how it all started? No, I think it actually dated way back to when I was 3 and had unfortunately gone missing. For 18 long years, I lived away from my home and family, growing older. As I grew older from being a child to a teenager and then a young adult, I kept searching for my roots again. And when my long-awaited dream of reuniting with my family became reality, it was nothing like I'd expected. There was no joyous reunion, no tears of happiness. Instead, I was met with something close to indifference, as if I were a stranger who had wandered into their lives. My parents seemed to have moved on from me after all those years I was gone. All the love they had was for Bella. Barely any left for me. I guess there was nothing left, in fact, because if there was, I would at least be pitted enough to have been told that Bella had returned from abroad and had somehow found her way into my husband's arms. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed with an incoming video call from Bella. I didn't want to answer it at first, but ended up swiping green. Bella's face popped up on the screen, sitting in the same room from the video, with a towel wrapped around her body. Hi, hope you're having a happy day over there, Bella chirped with a smug smile. She moved the phone's camera around to show more of the room, and in the background, I caught a faint glimpse of Mark walking into the bathroom. Guess who's going to die a pathetic old virgin? Not me. She laughed callously. I silently clenched my teeth. I was reeling with annoyance from the insult. He doesn't deserve you. She added, he deserves better. And I'm what's perfect for him, darling. There was no way I was going to listen to any more of that. I angrily ended the call and flung the phone to the bed, then burying my head in my hands. I'd had enough. I wasn't going to sit still and let myself be dragged to the ground like a piece of rag any longer. By the time Mark would return to the house, it was already well into the night. I sat on the cold tiles of the living room, hanging my chin on my palm and nearly dozing off when I heard the sound of the front door clicking. That familiar musky scent of his followed him in as well, and I could swear I could smell Bella on him too. My eyes blinked open, and I raised my head, locking a blank gaze with his face. There was that brick-hard look on his face, which he always had when I was around. To think of how he was grinning from ear to ear earlier with Bella. After our marriage, everything I'd been told by my parents to do, I did. Both taking care of his food, his daily life, and several other things that couldn't be counted, all for 3 years. It started happening frequently that it became a ritual, like a dance of habit ingrained in my daily routine. Mark also accepted it without question. But not for one day did Mark spare me as much as a second glance. Mark shut the door behind him and began walking into his room, treating me as usual like I was invisible, and for the first time, I spoke. I want a divorce. He turned to face me, an incredulous look on his face. What are you talking about? I don't want this title of wife anymore, I answered without mincing words. That day 3 years ago, when I stood in that white dress, and him in his tuxedo, a congregation behind us, and a preacher in front of us, and saw that calm look of restrained anger in his eyes when he saw that it was not Bella behind the veil, but me. I remember my chest tightening behind the diamond necklace I was wearing. The way his stare burned. How stupid and helpless I felt in that dress. How my parents smiled like they'd not just pushed me out there against my will, and the congregation cheered with probably no idea of what was going on. You may now kiss the bride, the pastor announced. Mark leaned closer towards me, but not for a kiss. He merely brushed his face past my cheek and spoke into my ear. The only thing you can get is the title of wife. And that title is what I was giving back to him. I didn't want it anymore. I wished I'd never let myself take it in the first place. I'd let go of too much of myself and endured more than I needed to. It was the height of it already. I want to get a divorce, Mark. I repeated myself in case he didn't hear me the first time, even though I knew he'd heard me clearly. He stared at me with a frown before answering coldly. It's not up to you. I'm very busy. Don't waste my time with such boring topics, or try to attract my attention. How typical of him to believe that I was trying to get his attention. I hadn't attracted that so-called attention of his for over 3 years, and when I mention a divorce, he remembers it. The last thing I was going to do was argue or bicker with him. I will have the lawyer send you the divorce agreement, was all I said, as calmly as I could muster. He didn't even say another word after that, and just went through the door he'd been standing in front of, slamming it harshly behind him. My eyes lingered on the knob of the door a bit absent-mindedly before I pulled the wedding ring off my finger and placed it on the table. Don't even ask why I had it on in the first place. I grabbed my suitcase, which I'd already had my things packed in, and headed out of the house. The wind outside felt different afterward, like a heavy burden was being lifted off my shoulders for the first time in a very long while. The feeling of the night breeze blowing through the strands of my hair was immaculate. Grabbing my phone from my purse and swiping my fingers quickly across the screen, I put the phone to my ear, hearing it ring. I am divorcing, come pick me up. The soft wind of the night continued to whip my hair to and fro while I stood outside with my suitcase next to me. I was already out of that house, finally. Not quite far ahead into the streets, I noticed the headlights flashing brightly in my direction, and a faint smile quirked up my lips because I recognized who it was in an instant. The flamboyant red sports car pulled over right in front of where I stood, and an even more flamboyant woman was in the driver's seat twiddling her fingers at me as she wound down the windows. It was Grace. Grace was not only my best friend, she was also my business partner. We've been inseparable since our college days. And because we both shared a passion for fashion, we both decided to turn our dreams into reality by co-founding Luxe Vogue, a fashion-forward online shopping website that quickly became a favorite among young trendsetters. Grace had a keen eye for design, so she was in charge of designing stunning clothing collections, while I focused on designing jewelry at our equally jointly owned studio, Atelier. Atelier was a high-end fashion studio catering to elite clientele. Our business acumen and creative vision catapulted us into the world of high-ranking millionaires. I knew right when I saw that grin on her lips that she was going to tease me next. Playful banters for us were as natural as breathing. I stepped into the passenger seat of Grace's car, sighing and immediately clicking my seatbelt in. Finally willing to leave that bastard and return to work, Grace quipped with a mischievous grin. I really don't understand why you would waste 3 years of your life to be a housewife, taking care of an asshole who doesn't love you at all. I rolled my eyes because I was blind, but now I can see. Heard of that song? Grace chuckled, starting the car. Well, I'm glad your eyes are wide open now. We've got a whole lot to run. We can't have you distracted by some guy who doesn't appreciate you. You know, Sydney, I have to say this again, that whole married with that guy? I hated it on you. She glanced briefly at the gate of Mark's house. Gosh, I've been dying to say that. I chuckled, resting my elbow tiredly on the car door. Oh, please. From the onset, Grace had always hated my marriage to Mark. She had tried, in her way, to convey her disapproval, both indirectly and directly. There were times when she would come open about it, and other times it was more subtle, like the way she would hesitate before congratulating me on another anniversary, or the way she would change the subject whenever I brought up something related to my marriage. I was glad we could finally freely talk and make jests about it. I mean, what was with all those frumpy dresses and sensible shoes? You, Grace. I laughed again. Mr. Wrong really had an influence on your wardrobe? I've never seen you in so much beige in my life. And the day I saw you wearing flats with a cocktail dress, trust me, I nearly died. I burst out laughing again, shaking my head. Oh, come on. You know I was just trying to fit into the whole perfect wife image. Never again. Thank goodness you're back out of that hole. I still thought the things she'd said earlier were funny, so I playfully swatted at Grace. Hey, but I thought I looked pretty good in those dresses though. Hun? Grace funnily raised her upper lip, maybe to a blind man. This reminded me of a function I had attended with Mark, wearing a dress I'd thought was elegant, which he later deemed too revealing and promiscuous for a wife. Not only did his insults hurt, but what hurt even more was the public humiliation I faced when others witnessed it too. The incident had reached my parents' ears and led to further embarrassment. I think that's when my wardrobe began to change. I'd been trying to please everyone, especially Mark and my parents. What a fool I'd been. I sighed. Goodness, I missed us. Grace nodded. Yeah, me too, she said, stepping on the gas pedal, and as she did, the engine roared to life before dashing out into the road and merging into the flow of traffic. So, where are we headed now? To the airport, of course. I've got a sudden urge for a short trip. Wow, I thought you were going to come over to my place at least for the night or something, Grace remarked. I shrugged. Just want to get away for a bit. Grace leaned back in her seat, resting a hand on the car door while the other stayed on the steering wheel. Well, needed anyway. That reminds me, Grace said, a company is interested in buying the website. And I kid you not, it's an insane offer. I'm tempted. I'm really not in the mood for work right now. We'll talk about that when I return, I said, glancing at Grace. Grace nodded understandingly. Totally get it. I really needed this trip to get my mind out for a bit, to revel in my freedom from Mark and the suffocating routine I had fallen into. I knew my parents were going to be mad. They always were when I tried to break loose from their demanding decisions. But I couldn't even care less for whatever was to come. The thought of finally leaving everything behind was just liberating. Grace pulled into the airport. As the car came to a stop, I unclicked my seatbelt and reached for my handbag, eagerly taking out my phone. I dialed a number and held the phone to my ear. I'm here now, where are you? I spoke first. All right, I added as the receiver responded before ending the call. Grace looked at me curiously. Who was that? She asked. You'll see. I grinned cryptically. Grace gave me a suspicious look, but didn't probe me any further. While we waited in the car, a man in a sharp suit approached the car, carrying a briefcase. Immediately recognizing him, I told Grace, wait here, before getting out of the car to meet him. Good evening. He greeted me professionally, and I returned the pleasantries with a nod. He was the lawyer I had called earlier to help draft the divorce papers. The lawyer opened his briefcase and took out an envelope containing the papers. While he did, I glanced back at the car and saw Grace watching curiously. Here, he handed me the papers. I glanced through them one after the other, feeling an overwhelming feeling of finality wash down on me. Do you need some more time to go through them? The man asked. I shook my head, determined. No, where do I sign? He pointed to various areas on the pages, here, flipping through them, over here, and here, he directed. Then he handed me a pen. I signed each page and spot that required my signature, finally handing the papers back to him along with the pen. I'll have Mr. Torres receive a copy as well, and we'll send yours too, he said as he placed the papers back in his briefcase. You can have them sent to my mail. Will do, he said. I nodded. Thanks, shaking his hand. It's my job, he replied, smiling. As I got back into the car and shut the door after me, I let out a heavy sigh. It felt kind of warmer in the car compared to outside. Grace looked at me, immediately asking, so, are you going to kill my curiosity now? I looked at her and replied, that was the lawyer. I signed the divorce papers. Grace's eyes widened, and she let out a dramatic scream. Are you crazy? You're actually giving up on asking him for alimony? He's a billionaire. You could get $100 million in alimony. I chuckled bitterly. It doesn't matter. I just want to divorce him as soon as possible. I'm a millionaire by myself. I don't need him to raise my value. Grace shook her head, but still $100 million. She looked so pained. So much so I nearly chuckled. I shrugged. Let him keep his money to himself. We're bigger than that anyway. I just want to move on with my life. Girl. I totally get it. Grace reached out and squeezed my hand. I'm here for you no matter what. And that's all that matters to me. I smiled and squeezed her hand in return. We must have looked like two typical best friends acting in some kind of soap opera for a minute. Grace snapped us out of our little emotional moment. All right, let's get your things, she said, getting out of the car to help me pull my suitcase from the back seat and raising the handle tall. Tell all the eligible bachelors in town, the queen is back, I announced loudly into the wind. Woohoo! The queen is back, everyone. Grace hooted after me. Mark POV. I pulled into the driveway, exhausted. Another long day of both work and fun had left me drained, and all I wanted was to unwind and relax. I stepped out of the car and loosened my tie, eager to get inside and finally relax. When I entered the house, I saw Sydney sitting there, staring at me with her usual blank look. I barely spared her a glance while heading straight for my study. "I want a divorce," Sydney said before I could even reach the sanctuary of my study. Divorce? Ridiculous was the first word that came to my mind, and ridiculous it was indeed. The family business of Sydney's parents had been lent to the GT Group, which I owned. This was a contract that benefited both parties in every sense of the word. Sydney was only a woman I'd married, who depended on her parents and me for survival. Divorce, huh? It was obviously her new way of crying for attention, like she was fond of doing. It used to be the pitiful demeanor she carried around her, which was enough to convince an outsider that she was being treated wrongly, even though that had never been the case. We'd been keeping up the married couple facade for 3 years already. Now she was pulling a new stunt, which I wasn't going to fall for. The next morning, I entered the dining room to have breakfast before leaving, but all I was met with was an empty table. A frown creased my brow as I asked one of the workers I was able to find lingering around, "Where is she? And where's my food?" "I've not seen her this morning, sir," the worker replied. Later on, I got a report from eyes who'd happened to see her leaving with her suitcase last night. Most of her things were also gone from her room. Oh. This perhaps had to do with the divorce thing she brought up. Did she expect me to fall for it or talk to her about it? I shrugged off the thought, grabbed my suitcase and jacket, and headed out. She had probably just gone to her parents' house. Where else could she go? They would surely knock some sense into her head about how to be a good wife, and send her back. My eyes darted up from the files in front of me when my assistant entered the office. Without a word, he placed a file on the table in front of me with a curt bow. "I think you need to see this, sir," he said before stepping back. I took off my glasses and pulled the file closer, flipping it open to find the emboldened words "divorce proceedings." I frowned, continuing to scan the papers. She had already signed them. "Thank you, you may leave," I said to my assistant, who bowed again before exiting the room. Sydney had taken the first step in what seemed like a smart game to her, but to me, it was nonsense. Did she think I had the time for all this? GT Group was not only my pride and joy, but also proof of my years of hard work and dedication. It was a large private equity firm based in Europe that specialized in investing in a variety of sectors like consumer goods, services, fashion, medical, and technology. With over 250 investment projects under our belt, we were a force to be reckoned with in the business world. It was our third round of fundraising. We needed to secure a staggering $5 billion from investors worldwide. This was a critical moment for my firm, and the next month was going to be a whirlwind of activities. With me having to crisscross the globe and meet with potential investors from New York to Tokyo, London to Hong Kong. The next 6 months for me were packed with meetings, presentations, and negotiations. And here someone was, bringing some useless papers to my table. I angrily gathered up the papers and marched over to the shredder in the corner of my office, feeding them into the shredder and watching the machine devour every single one of them before settling back down in my seat to resume what was 100 times more important. It had been 3 long months of hectic fundraising for GT Group. I finally returned home to find that Sydney still wasn't there. My nose was hit with a gust of stuffiness when I pushed the door to her bedroom open, and the way everything was completely covered in dust, I could tell that it had been left unoccupied for a long time. She'd not returned yet? I angrily stormed out, picked up my phone, and dialed her phone number. "Sorry, the number you're trying to call is no longer in use," came the automated voice through the speaker. I dialed again. "Sorry, the number you're trying to..." I cut the call with a grit to my teeth. "Find her immediately." I turned to my assistant. "Get in touch with her parents, whatever you need to do." The man bowed hurriedly and scurried off, while I retreated to my room, both tired and exhausted. She'd successfully added more fuel to my already foul mood. I went into the shower, turned on the tap, let a torrent of cold water rain over my head, and wished all that iciness could take away all the fatigue and frustration I felt. Eventually, my assistant returned with the news that Sydney's parents were also unaware of her whereabouts and hadn't heard from her for a long time. Despite all, I still felt that Sydney's disappearance was part of her elaborate scheme to get to me, and it did seem to be working because it seriously got on my nerves. I could only really take care of this after the next 3 months when I returned from my second trip. Before boarding the plane, I gave strict instructions to my assistant. "Find her before I return. If you fail, you'll lose your job." My assistant nodded at my words and hurried to assist with my suitcase. I paused, turned my head back because something on the table in the corners caught my hand. When I moved closer to see, it was the wedding ring. The ring that was initially meant for Bella, but ended up on Sydney's finger. The ring lost all significance to me since that day 3 years ago, which was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. My bride was not Bella, the woman I loved, but Sydney, her sister. I felt like such a fool back then, standing in front of the congregation like nothing was wrong. I just had to keep the show going on, and I made it very clear to Sydney that I wasn't going to be accepting her as my wife. She could keep the title for all she cared. As soon as I'd stepped down from the altar and worn the last round of fake smiles at the guests and photographers at every corner, I got into my car and pulled the damned ring off my finger. In fact, I didn't remember where I'd kept it after that day. I probably flung it off in annoyance. But Sydney had decided to wear hers. Now that I saw that ring lying there in its own full circle of dust, I couldn't help thinking, maybe Sydney was serious about the divorce after all. My jaw clenched briefly again before I turned from that table, leaving the useless relic there and walking out of the door. I still had a lot more work to do than occupy myself with this drama. I arrived at the airport, immediately pulling on my sunglasses before stepping out of the car. I was quite popular, and a couple of people would often approach me, stare, or gawk because they recognized me from television or some other outlet. "I'm sorry, are you so-and-so?" That kind of thing. The glasses were a minimal disguise, but they still did the job to an extent, with me having to add some bizarre mysteriousness to my outfit. While sometimes I'd nod with a smile and try to keep the interactions brief, I was particularly not in the mood today. I headed towards the boarding gate, through the bustling airport crowd, at the same time checking my wristwatch, when a woman brushed past me. The trail of her perfume danced over my face, and slowly into my nose. The citrus and flowery scent were insanely familiar. It almost made me feel nostalgic in a strange kind of way. I stopped slowly in my tracks. I tried to fight the urge, but I couldn't resist turning my head. Her figure was receding into the distance behind me, and I could not tell if she was someone I knew. I didn't recall ever seeing that face before. Sydney's POV. As soon as I returned to the airport, I could already see Grace waving eagerly at me from the other side. Enthusiastic smiles and grins curled up my lips the closer I got to her. My short trip had come to an end, and might I say that those were the happiest 3 months of my life in a very long time. I wheeled my suitcase faster behind me and rushed, also waving back at Grace, and rushing to meet her where she was standing. I hadn't noticed for a second at first, but someone familiar walked quickly past me. I couldn't help stopping to turn. I could swear I knew that back. No one could tell me otherwise. It had to be Mark. It was him. I was right, I confirmed with myself when I actually stopped and turned back to look at the person. It was Mark. I couldn't have missed it, walking with those fast strides of his, as usual. He probably didn't see me, or if he maybe didn't recognize me again. I'd been gone for just 3 months, but if that was enough time for him not to know who I was again, from just a glance, then it meant that I'd done a fantastic job with erasing that woman he used to know from my life. Sure, I wouldn't look like his ex-wife with the way I looked now. My outfit was different from what I used to wear, that style he was familiar with. Changed my hair, they weren't in those ugly buns and up styles anymore. My hair was down in long, luscious waves. My face shone elegantly bright with both good skincare. Also had some makeup on. A bright red bodycon dress that hugged my curves in all the right places. In all, I was looking like a better and beautiful version of that self I left behind as Mrs. Torres. I chuckled, proudly, and pushed my sunglasses down from my hair, down to my face, before swinging my head back to the direction I was heading at and pulling my suitcase behind me again. By this time Grace was already walking towards me, so I had to let go of the suitcase and wrap my hands happily around her.
"Geez, girl.
I missed you so freaking much,"
she squeaked as she squeezed me.
"Me too," I cooed, sighing when we disengaged, and I brushed off some strands from my face. "I almost didn't want to return," I added. "You must be joking." Grace jokingly frowned. "So you meant to not return today?" "The plain truth," I shrugged with a giggle. "Then I probably would have had to come drag you back here myself," Grace said, smiling. She leaned down to pull my suitcase for me. "Come on, let's go." We both walked to Grace's car where it was parked. It was a different car from what she dropped me off with the last time. A black Jeep. "You got another car?" I asked on our way to it. "Yeah," she answered gladly, like she'd been waiting for me to pop the question. "Glorious, isn't it?" she added. "It sure is glorious," I commented. "Should probably get a new one too," I added. *CK, you mean probably? "You're definitely getting a new one." I glanced at her and laughed a little incredulously. "Gosh, you're so dramatic. We should go tomorrow. It's almost the weekend anyway." I merely nodded to her suggestion and waited for her to click on the car remote before settling into the car. Then she came in next after she'd put my suitcase at the back. We'd driven quite some distance from the entrance of the airport when I finally broke the news to Grace. Although the most casual way, "I saw you-know-who on my way here." She spared me a glance from the steering. "Huh? Who?"
"Mark."
"Really? When was that?" She didn't sound too surprised. Maybe it was because she was trying to swerve into the highway. We practically brushed past each other while I was busy waving at you. The tires finally settled perfectly on the road, now practically gliding. I could see the funny expression on her face. "So he didn't recognize you?" She chuckled. "Man, Why am I so happy to hear that? Her voice rose again until she began laughing so heartily, I had no choice but to join in. You needed to see how much I swelled when I noticed too. I must have been looking too good to be true. After the long drive of talks and laughs, we finally drove up the winding road to our shared villa.
Grace pulled up to the entrance. She turned to me.
I'll just drop you off here, darling, she said. Going somewhere? I asked her, and she nodded. Yeah, just remembered I was invited to this party. Not the most enthusiastic about it, but I just have to attend it for a few minutes at least. Oh, I nodded, unclicking the seatbelts. Then I'd be back to hear you tell me every single detail about your trip. She piped at me when I got out of the car.
You bet.
I smiled, shutting the door after me and pulling out my suitcase before I watched her turn the car back in the direction we'd just come from. With a sigh, I gazed up at the imposing structure of our home. It was a stunning residence halfway up a mountain overlooking the sea, a playground for the wealthy elite of the city.
It was so good to be back home.
I'd missed everything so much. Even the fresh and exotic smell in the air was the best touch of spice to everything. I climbed the stairs to our house. The cool evening air brushed against my skin as I reached for the doorknob, pushing the front door open with a soft click before stepping inside. But before I could fully immerse myself in the familiarity of everything I'd returned to, a shot of fear danced its way sharply through my veins. I felt it before I saw it. That cold, hard object pressed against my waist from behind. I froze in fear, feeling the harsh thumping of my heartbeat everywhere in my body. I knew instantly what that thing at my side was, though I couldn't see it. It was more like a gut feeling. Don't make a sound, he whispered in a low and threatening voice, the man with the gun behind me. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to scream for help, but I knew that was a foolish move to make. His presence was engulfing behind me, and his breath was hot against my neck. Then the scent of fresh blood reached my nostrils, also mixing with the fear that had already taken hold. I realized then that the man behind me was injured. That metallic tang of blood was in the air. I instinctively raised my hands in surrender as a silent plea for mercy. I knew that any sudden movements could provoke him further, so I stood there with my eyes closed, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't dare look at his face. Seeing the face of a criminal often meant being silenced. Permanently. I had heard enough stories at least to know that much. I felt his shadow loom over me. The dark presence of him sent more shivers down my spine. Open up, he snarled. I was too scared to even understand what he meant, so I kept my eyes closed. I said, open your eyes. He snapped in annoyance and I jolted, now opening my eyes to see his figure outlined in front of me against the dim light filtering through the window. The first thing I saw was his chest, and the trail of blood marred the fabric of his shirt. Then my eyes traveled upward to look at his face for the first time. Surprisingly, the man was handsome, with chiseled features and dark, piercing eyes. There was an air of authority about him, a confidence that spoke of someone accustomed to being in control. He looked like someone who could easily pass for a member of a mafia. He thrust a wad of fabric into my hands, and as I unfurled it, I saw that it was a bandage. I didn't need to be told what he wanted me to do next. I gathered my resolve with trembling hands. He pulled off his jacket, and then his shirt. Now I saw the wound on his torso. It was a gunshot wound. The skin around it was raw and inflamed. It looked like he had already removed the bullet himself, but the bleeding had not stopped. Sit, I stammered. He complied and sat down heavily on a nearby chair. I took a deep breath. Do I get the first aid kit? I asked. Just do it. He grunted at the bandage with pain. I sat by him and began to dress his wound. If only someone saw how terribly my hands were trembling as I worked. He grunted in discomfort and grimaced as I moved, but he did not protest until I completely tied the bandages as tightly as I dared. The loud chime of the doorbell split through the silence. I glanced at the man's face. He didn't do much, but quickly moved to hide. I took this as a cue to answer the door, although I was sure he was probably still nearby and ready to blast my head off if I did anything stupid. I opened the door cautiously. Mark was standing there. He must have recognized me at the airport after all followed me here. Mark grabbed my hand. Come home with me, he urged. I shook off his hand. Didn't you receive the divorce agreement? I asked pointedly. Sydney's POV. I threw that damn agreement into the shredder. He spat. I've already canceled an important meeting for you. I can't waste any more time. He hadn't changed one bit. He was still that angry, impatient man I'd left behind, who thought the world revolved around him. Rather, my world. If he didn't want his time wasted, why the hell did he follow me back there? Whether he threw the documents into the shredder, or burnt them to ashes with a lighter from his study, or kept them somewhere, none of that was my business. I stepped back from the door and stared angrily at his face. My intention to divorce you is serious and solemn. If you don't accept a divorce by agreement, then I will have to file a lawsuit for divorce. That will only waste more of your precious time, Mr. Man. I made that much clear. At a point, my mind would slide back to think about the man who was probably still hiding somewhere in the house. I was also standing in front of the door and making sure to block Mark from taking a peek inside and seeing something he shouldn't. The case might just escalate further from an ex-couple bickering over divorce documents into something more dangerous. Mark climbed even closer towards the door, but I couldn't move an inch back at that point because it was the furthest I could go in protecting the entrance. But I silently reveled in the fact he was affected that I wasn't stepping away from him anymore. Mark gritted his teeth and said, "I'll say it one last time. Whether we divorce or not is not up to you." He even had the nerve to tell me that I had no say in the matter, that I had no right on my part to break off the alliance. Thanks to Mark, the fear I'd been feeling initially, due to the man from earlier, had now turned into annoyance. How dare he presume to dictate my choices, to deny me agency over my own life? I had tolerated his domineering attitude for far too long, but now I had reached my limit. But I realized sooner that there was no reasoning with him. In fact, I didn't have that much time on my hands either to spare for arguing with him.
Mark would always be stubborn like that.
I swallowed hard and bit back the next words I'd intended on hurling at him. Instead, I sighed and asked, "You really want to talk about this?" "Yes, and you're coming with me now," he demanded. His tone brooked no argument. I stood there for a moment, exhausted and rubbing temples tiredly before reluctantly agreeing, "Fine, if you're so interested in wasting your time talking, why not?" After taking a quick glance back into the house and not seeing that man anywhere in sight, I thought to myself that stepping out at that time would probably be in our interests. He probably also needed to leave. I walked out of the front door and shut the door behind me. "After you," I said to Mark. He turned from me with a frown and stepped off the porch, while I followed behind him. I walked slowly behind Mark, who was striding angrily ahead of me, and while he continued to march ahead, my eyes caught a pole lying in the garden close by. It was a simple metal pole, but at that moment it was the perfect tool I needed. Glancing back at Mark, who was still a few steps ahead of me, I took a deep breath and stepped away from the path to pick up the pole from the ground. The object was quite heavier in my hands than I'd imagined, but that was less of the problem. The problem was right in front of me. I began walking behind Mark, the pole held tightly in my hands. I positioned myself right behind him and waited for the perfect time to strike. When he stopped to look at something on his phone, I saw my opportunity and with all my strength, swung the pole. I hit him hard at the back of his head. I hadn't expected him to get knocked out that quickly. Despite all his bravado, he crumpled to the ground, unconscious after one blow to his head. Look at all that aggression sprawled on the ground with him. After dropping the pole, I went to meet his assistant waiting outside the gate. "Come and take your boss out of my premises," I said. The assistant sat up in the driver's seat. At first, he didn't seem to have understood what I was saying. Then, he looked behind me and sprang out of the car when he saw Mark lying on the floor. "Mr. Torres, Mr. Torres," he exclaimed, rushing to Mark's side, checking for any signs of consciousness. Mr. Torres was out, unfortunately. Even when the assistant tried to lift Mark up, he was too heavy. But he eventually was able to lift Mark over his shoulders and carry him away. Mark's hands dangled ridiculously over the man's shoulders. With some effort, the assistant managed to shove Mark's body into the back seat of the car. Then, he returned to me after closing the door. "Mrs. Tor." I held out my hand to silence him. "A new lady will soon inherit that title. Please call me Miss Turner. Also, tell your boss that I will resend him a divorce agreement. Please sign it as soon as possible, so we don't waste each other's time." The assistant nodded with the kind of expression that said, "I don't mean to get involved." He turned after a curt bow. "Have a good day," I said into the wind after him as he settled into the car with his boss and started the engine. I waited until the car had zoomed off into the distance before I finally turned away from there. And when I saw my front door again and remembered who was still waiting inside, the tension and fear that had left me earlier returned. At first, I thought to myself, should I just take this opportunity to run away? But something held me back, I didn't know what. I kept on walking to the door. I pushed the door open after a deep breath and stepped inside. But I didn't go too far from the door, only using my eyes to search around for any signs of him. But he was nowhere. I walked even further into the house and looked around a bit more dedicatedly. He really was gone. I wouldn't have been able to explain the relief that descended on me right there and then, as well as the immediate anger that someone had actually come into my house despite the tight and expensive security. Angrily, I marched to the landline and dialed the number for the security company. "I need to upgrade the security system for my villa," I snapped as soon as I reached the other end, not bothering to sound friendly. "Villa number 27 in the hills. Your security system failed me tonight, and I won't tolerate it any longer." My life was in danger just moments ago. The operator on the other end of the line was saying something, but I was already too annoyed to listen patiently. "We apologize for any inconvenience, ma'am," the operator apologized. "We will send a team to upgrade your security system as soon as possible." I gave them my villa number again. "I expect your team to be here first thing in the morning. I added and hung up the phone with a frustrated sigh. The events of the evening had rattled me already in a matter of minutes. Just when I thought I could finally rest, my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and sighed. It was my dad. I answered the call reluctantly. "You must come to my birthday party this weekend with Mark." Dad's voice roared through the phone, and before I could respond, he hung up. I rolled my eyes in speechless frustration. Dad had always been adamant about me being with Mark, despite my repeated attempts at showing how much I hated it. I pulled out my phone, opened the call log, and found my dad's number. With a firm press of my finger, I brought up the options menu and selected block number. A confirmation message popped up, and I tapped confirm. The number disappeared from my contacts, outrightly banished from my phone. I dropped the phone on the couch, sank down to the floor, my back against the soft cushions, and rested my head tiredly on the arm of the couch. Despite how angry and upset I was, I knew I still had to go back for a visit this weekend. It was Dad's birthday, and it wouldn't be the perfect opportunity to announce my divorce from Mark. They needed that I was really serious about outing myself from it all. Mark's POV. I groaned as I turned in bed. My head throbbed dully, and I held it as I slowly rose from the bed. I looked at my surroundings and wondered why I was at home. I should be at work. I dropped my head in my hands and tried to remember. It didn't even take a second before the memories rushed back. My assistant had been able to locate where Sydney was, and I had left every work I was doing to speak some sense into her. I remember that I had ordered her to follow me then. I frowned. Everything had gone black. That witch. How dare she hit me? I gritted as I got off the bed. I glimpsed some medication on the drawers as I staggered out of my room. What was wrong with her? Why was she taking this far? I thought. The sound of wood banging against walls reverberated through the house as I threw every door open. Where the heck is she? The staff of my household just stood there speechless. Some of them flinched each time the door banged. I had asked where she was about a dozen times, and they had all answered me a dozen times that they didn't know where she was. They repeated what they told me that morning. The last time they saw her was with a suitcase when she waltzed out of my house. I remember that day too. I had been slightly surprised. I wondered what gave her the guts and had thought she was going to get over whatever was happening with her and come whimpering back. My stomach growled as I continued to slam the doors closed. I even checked the garage. It honestly felt like I was running mad. My growling stomach coupled with my throbbing head and my frustration grew. I stormed back to my room and took a calming shower that did nothing to calm me but only washed off the dirt on my skin. When I finished getting dressed, I used a painkiller from the medicines on my drawers to stop my head from aching. I picked up my car keys, shrugged into my suit jacket, and left the house. As I drove to work, my grip on the steering wheel was strong, and I pressed hard down on the pedal. I was past the speed limit, but it was the only thing I could do not to drive back to that house she was in and strangle her. She wanted my attention. Now she fully had it. Where is she? I bellowed to my assistant the moment my assistant closed the door behind him. I don't know, sir. His voice quivered as he spoke. I left her at the villa and rushed you to a nearby clinic before I took you home. I left the medications they prescribed on your drawers. He cleared his throat before he continued. But she did tell me to not call her Mrs. Tourist, but Miss Turner. She said that a new lady will soon inherit the title. I just stared at him as he spoke, my rage built with each word he dropped, ready to explode. He took a step forward, a file dangling in his hands. She also said she'd resend the divorce agreement. Here's it. He placed the file in front of me. I received it just before you came in. She wants you to sign it as soon as possible so you don't waste each other's time. And that was it. That darned word. In blind rage, I gripped the sheets of paper and flung it across the room. If I hear the word divorce one more time, you're out. I told him sternly. If she wants me to sign the papers, she had better bring it herself. My hands clenched and unclenched as I struggled to hold in my anger. What exactly was she playing at? Has she gone crazy? Wasn't it enough that I let her stay in my house and feed? I wondered on what grounds she'd say she was filing for a damn divorce. I do not want to hear that word again. Ever. Am I understood? Yes, sir. His stance straightened, and I suspected that he almost saluted. Just then, the door creaked open and Bella stepped in. The instant I set my eyes on her, my anger evaporated to an extent, but I could still feel it. I could still feel the itch to shred those papers into pieces, the urge to punch something or someone. It was either Bella didn't notice the tension in the room, or she decided to ignore it as she sashayed her hips toward me and perched on my lap, her elegant arms shooting out to wrap around my neck. She placed a quick kiss on my lips. She pulled back, pouting when I didn't return the gesture. You've been working all month. We haven't seen each other for a long time. Her pout deepened, her brows furrowed feebly, and her eyes slightly glistened. In my peripheral vision, I could see my assistant picking up the papers and shuffling them together. Then, he silently left the room. For a moment, I thought of asking him to hand over the papers so I could shred them like I did the previous ones, but then Bella's presence stopped me. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I focused on the feeling of her soft-ass cheeks pressed on my thighs, her fingers intermittently fiddling with my collar and grazing the skin at the back of my neck. I breathed in and out. I tried to relax. My arms circled her waist, and I pulled her closer. I should forget about Sydney's stunts and desperation for attention and focus on the woman in my arms right now. The one I actually wanted and would readily give my attention anytime. I opened my eyes, and her lips were jutted out as she looked at me. My heart momentarily skipped a beat, and my lips stretched into a reflexive smile. God, she was so beautiful. I'm sorry, honey. You know it's work. She rolled her eyes. You should always find time for me. I'll work on that. I shifted my head closer to hers, and my lips grazed hers in a brief kiss. So, what shall I gift my queen so she'd forgive me? I could see the twitch on the corners of her lips as she struggled to keep her pout in place. Her pupils rolled up as she thought of what she wanted. I wanted jewelry. Her eyes were on me now, one designed by Atelier Studios. Atelier? I raised a brow. Her head bobbed up and down. Atelier designs the best jewelry. All the girls in the upper levels own one. I want one too. My arms further tightened around her waist.
Done.
I will make sure it's specially made for you. Her face broke into a smile, and my heart swelled. Thank you. She squealed and pulled me in for a hug. I made a mental note, as I hugged her back, to get one for Sydney too. It would shut her up and make her feel she had the attention she desperately begged for. Bella suddenly pulled back, her eyes peering into mine. This Sunday is my dad's birthday, you remember, right? I did not remember. My head was too occupied to accommodate the date of someone's birthday.
I nodded. Yep.
I do remember. She smiled. The last thing I wanted right now was for her to get mad. It's actually why I'm here. He's throwing a party, and I want you there. I'm sure Dad does too. She looked away and ransacked her tiny bag that was sitting primly on my table. Her hand emerged with a white card. She slapped it on my desk. That's his invitation card. You're coming. She turned to me, right? I hesitated. There was a lot to do. My last business trip had got me more investors, which equaled more money, and more money equally meant more work. I couldn't afford to slack or spend time attending events that didn't aid the growth of the firm. I opened my mouth to explain to her why I wouldn't be present, but I stopped. If I could make time to attend this party, I could accomplish two things: get to speak with Sydney's father and please Bella. Even if it were for a few minutes, I'd be able to speak with him and let him know how urgent he needed to knock some sense into Sydney's head and remind her that our unfortunate alliance was a win-win, so she had to stop yapping about divorce. I decided. Perfect, it will be a few hours away from work, but it would be worth it. I smiled at Bella. I'd make time and attend. I placed a kiss on her cheeks, and she blushed. I can't wait, she chirped. Sydney's POV. I couldn't stop the laugh that burst out of me as I took in the fourth special order for the day. Usually, Atelier receives a bunch of orders on a daily basis, and our employees take care of these orders. But if the jewelry order were to be custom-made, the orders came directly to me. Right there on my screen was an order for 2 pieces of jewelry from Mark's assistant. It had been included in the preference space for it to stand out from any of our jewelries, then he ended it with, "Just name your price." Typical. Only Mark would be so egotistic to make a request sound insulting. It was Mark's assistant that placed the order, but I was sure the order was on behalf of Mark. There was no way his assistant would be able to afford Atelier's custom-made designs for himself. I swiveled in my chair, whistling, time to make some extra millions. I turned back to my laptop screen and reread the last phrase. My grin widened. Oh, I am so going to name my price. Briefly, I wondered who he'd be gifting, and only Bella came to mind. I cooed, wiping the fake tears trying to escape my eyes. He wants to gift her 2 custom-made jewelries at once?
So sweet.
There was no better way for my day to go than an order for Mark. I was ready to make a fortune from him. After all, I didn't ask for alimony. As I thought of how much I should charge Mark, swiveling in the chair, I couldn't help but notice the clean, expensive paint on the walls, the latest inbuilt television, the plush chairs. I stopped swirling on the chair and looked around. Everything looked so well kept. My heart warmed with gratitude. Even in my long absence, Grace didn't fail to keep this place running. She efficiently handled the 2 businesses all by herself when she could have easily abandoned Atelier and fully focused on the fashion sector that she handles so well. Then I remembered her upcoming birthday and thought it would be the perfect time to also gift her a piece of specially made jewelry for her hard work and support apart from her birthday gift. Now having 3 specially made jewelries added to the pending orders I had, I decided to get to work. First, I made a sketch for the first 4 pieces of jewelry, which was one of our client's daughter's graduation gift, Mark's and Grace's. The latter's jewelry stood out. Then I designed a 3D jewelry model for all of them. I took extra care and time in picking out the color and gemstones for Grace. I needed it to be perfect. Hours later, I was done with the designs for the 4 pieces. For a brief second, I reclined in my chair, my lips curved in a smile as I appreciated my handiwork. I got out of my head, printed out what I designed, and strode to the workshop. I got greetings from the workers there, and I returned their greetings with a smile. I put on the appropriate uniform and got to work. It was hours later when I pulled the helmet off my face and turned off the machine. I let out a deep breath and fanned my face. I stretched as I made a brisk walk out the door. I picked up a small bottle of water and guzzled almost half of it. It was already dark outside, and I already said my goodbyes to our employees hours ago.
It was always like that.
I always get carried away whenever I design these jewelry. I walked back in. I picked up the pendant for Grace, squinted my eyes as I admired what I had designed. I smiled. A foreign yet familiar sense of accomplishment wafted through me. I sighed contentedly. I hadn't felt that in a long time. I gave myself a pat on the back as I inspected the rest too. I stacked them safely in a jewelry box before packing up for the day. I shrugged on my coat and picked up my bag. I turned off the lights in the control room, then headed for the door and used my phone's torch to illuminate the now dark workspace. I let out a short scream. My feet came to an abrupt stop and my bag landed on the floor with a thud from my hands as the door abruptly burst open and a shadow stepped in. Sydney! My shoulders drooped and my legs almost gave as I breathed out in relief.
Grace.
I called in an admonishing tone. I shone my torch on her face. She was grinning widely, the excitement wafting off her in many folds. What's got you so hyped up? I asked as she took more steps closer to me. Come with me. She took my hands and dragged you both outside. You wouldn't believe this. I saw a super handsome guy at the bar. She rambled on as I locked the door. And guess what? He's Italian. She literally jumped as she said it. Her feet lifted off a few inches from the floor. She linked our arms immediately. I finished locking the door. I came back specifically to get you. Sister's got your back, right? I laughed at her dramatics. All this rush of excitement just because she saw a handsome Italian guy. But I pulled her closer and gave a kiss on the cheeks.
Come on.
You don't have to worry about what to wear. I brought your outfits, so we won't have to waste time going back home, she explained as we headed to her car. Whoa. I smirked as I lifted the skirt she brought to the air. I didn't think I had ever seen a skirt so short and sexy. It's gonna look good on you, I'm sure. She looked back from the front seat. Then she faced the front and started the car. As she sped to the bar, I struggled into the miniskirt in the small space of the back seat and put on the simple cute tank top she brought with it. I sprayed the perfume I had in my bag. Its scent was heavenly, until we were both coughing and giggling. When we arrived at the bar, I put on the black heels I had worn to work and adjusted my outfit. Inside the bar was bustling with so much energy, the neon lights slightly concealing the carefree occupants of the bar as they mindlessly and crazily swayed to the hip-hop jamming. I unconsciously bobbed my head to the music as we stepped in. Grace was looking around, her brows furrowed. She pouted. I can't find him. The hot guy. I had to shout, so she could hear me over the loud music. She nodded, but she still looked around. I touched her shoulder, so she'd face me.
Don't worry, babe.
Then I threw my hands in the air, Italian dude or not. I whined my waist and winked at her. Let's dance the night away. Instantly, her face lit up, and she threw her hands in the air too. We both danced our way to the dance floor, but not before grabbing a drink each from the bar girl. Grace downed hers in a go while I held mine above my head as I swayed to the music, hooting occasionally. I gulped the rest of my drink and placed the cup on a nearby table. Soon, the DJ changed beats and I felt myself go even crazier with the new beat. I shook my head in the air, my hair whipping around my face. I could hear Grace's giggles as she whined her waist and occasionally jiggled her ass. Go girl. I screamed and started my own dance moves too. I let go of all the stiffness I had gotten accustomed to in the previous years and swayed to the beat. We both giggled as the spotlight was turned on us. Some people had stood aside to watch us with cries of encouragement while some joined us. I tipped my head back, feeling the freedom. I couldn't believe I let go of all of these for the shit I called marriage. Grace was suddenly by my side, her face close to mine. I flinched when she screamed in my ear. I'll be right back. I need to use the restroom. I nodded and watched as she hurried down a hallway. I turned to one of the guys on the dance floor as I danced. He had some cool moves. I was so carried away, finally happy and free, that I didn't notice the smoldering set of eyes digging holes on my back. I didn't notice on time that the guy I was dancing with had stopped dancing and shifted away from me. His eyes were trained above my head.
Come on.
I shouted when I noticed. Why'd you stop?
He didn't answer me.
He just looked at something behind me. The people around him were also looking behind me. Still moving my body, I followed their line of sight and turned back. I let out a loud shocked gasp as strong fingers wrapped around my wrist and dragged me away from the spotlight. Let go. I screamed and attempted to wrench my hands from the bastard, but their hold was too strong. Stop it. I froze. The voice was dangerously low and calm, contrasting deeply with his strong grip. My head whipped up in anger and my eyes clashed with Mark's burning gaze. What are you doing here?